The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. as Amara Jones drove down the empty highway. Her eyes felt heavy after 14 hours at work. The meetings at CIA headquarters in Langley had gone longer than expected. As a senior intelligence officer, specializing in domestic threats, she'd spent the day briefing top officials about concerning patterns her team had uncovered. Just 20 more minutes, she whispered to herself, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension. The radio played softly. In the background, some late-night jazz program she'd found while scanning channels. Outside her window, the Virginia countryside was pitch black except for the occasional farmhouse light in the distance. Amara adjusted her rearview mirror and caught sight of headlights gaining on her from behind. She wasn't concerned at first. The highway had been mostly empty since she'd left the city limits. But then came the flash of red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. She checked her speedometer. 62 mph in a 65 zone. Her registration was current, tail light working. Still, she knew the drill. As a black woman driving alone at night, she'd been pulled over enough times to have developed a routine. Amara signaled, eased onto the shoulder, and cut the engine. The patrol car stopped about 20 feet behind her. Following protocol, both professional and personal, she placed her hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, clearly visible. Through her side mirror, she watched as a figure emerged from the police cruiser. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the distinctive swagger that comes with authority. The beam of a flashlight swept across her rear window before settling on her side mirror, deliberately aimed to blind her. The officer approached slowly, one hand resting on his holster, a detail that didn't escape Amara's notice. Years of training had taught her to observe everything, especially when tension hung in the air like it did now. The tap on her window was harder than necessary. She pressed the button to lower it, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Evening, officer," she said, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Something about this felt off from the start. The flashlight beam moved directly to her face, forcing her to squint against the harsh light. She couldn't make out the officer's features behind the glare, just a dark silhouette against the night sky. "License and registration." The voice was male, curt, with no return greeting. "Of course," Amara said, maintaining her composure. "My registration is in my glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now." She announced her movements clearly, another habit formed from experience. When she began to turn toward the glove box, the situation escalated in an instant. "Don't move." The sharp command was accompanied by the unmistakable sound of a weapon being drawn. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Amara froze, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. The officer had pulled his gun and was pointing it directly at her. Through the side mirror, she could see his stance had changed, feet apart, both hands on his weapon aimed squarely at her head. "Sir," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "you asked for my registration. I don't know what you were reaching for." He cut her off, his voice rising. "Could be a weapon, could be anything. People like you make sudden moves, bad things happen." The words, "people like you," hung in the air between them. Amara took a slow, deep breath. After 15 years in intelligence work, she had faced down threats in war zones with less fear than she felt now, on a deserted highway in her own country. "Officer," she tried again, her voice professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I was simply following your instructions. My registration is in the glove compartment, as I was trying to tell you." The gun remained pointed at her. In the harsh beam of the flashlight, she could now make out the officer's nameplate. "Benson, keep your hands on the wheel," Officer Benson instructed, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor by not pulling the trigger. "Use your right hand only. Slow. Any sudden moves and we're going to have a problem." Amara complied, moving her right hand with exaggerated slowness toward the glove compartment. The whole time she could feel the officer's eyes on her, could sense the gun trained on her head. The latch clicked as she opened the compartment. "Take out the papers only," Benson ordered. "Nothing else." With careful precision, Amara extracted the vehicle registration and insurance card. She held them out toward the window, still keeping her left hand visible on the steering wheel. Officer Benson snatched the papers from her hand, the beam of his flashlight now moving between the documents and her face. "Driver's license," he demanded. "It's in my purse on the passenger seat," Amara explained. "May I reach for it?" Benson hesitated, then nodded curtly, though his weapon remained drawn. Slowly, as Amara reached across to her purse, she became acutely aware of how this situation could go wrong in an instant. One misinterpreted movement, one nervous trigger finger. The statistics ran through her head. How many unarmed black people had been shot during routine traffic stops? She retrieved her wallet and carefully extracted her driver's license, handing it over with the same deliberate movements. Officer Benson studied her license, then looked back at her face, as if doubting they were the same person. "Amara Jones," he read aloud, a note of suspicion in his voice. "Where are you coming from at this time of night, Miss Jones?" "Work," she answered simply. "Work," he repeated, disbelief evident in his tone. "And what kind of work has you out this late?" Amara weighed her options. Normally, she kept her occupation vague. Government employee was her standard response. But with a gun still pointed in her direction, she wondered if this might be one of those rare instances where revealing more might be safer than revealing less. Before she could decide, Officer Benson's radio crackled to life with a dispatcher's voice. He stepped back slightly, keeping his weapon trained on her while he responded to the call. The exchange was brief, but it gave Amara a moment to collect herself, to think through her next steps. When Benson returned his attention to her, his suspicion seemed to have hardened into certainty. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The situation was escalating, not de-escalating. Amara knew what would come next. Questions about where she was going, why she was in this area, if the car was really hers. She'd been through versions of this before, but never with a gun drawn from the start. "May I ask why?" she inquired, her tone respectful but firm. "Because I said so," Benson replied, his finger moving dangerously close to the trigger guard. "Out of the car. Now." The night air hit Amara like a cold slap as she stepped out of her car. The highway stretched empty in both directions. No witnesses, no passing cars, just darkness broken only by the harsh patrol car lights painting everything and alternating. Flashes of red and blue. "Face the vehicle." "Hands on the hood," Officer Benson commanded, his gun still drawn. Amara complied, placing her palms flat against the cool metal of her car hood. Years of training told her to stay calm, to de-escalate. The asphalt beneath her feet felt unsteady as her mind raced through possible outcomes. "Spread your feet," Benson ordered, moving closer. She widened her stance, keeping her movement slow and deliberate. The officer stood behind her now, close enough that she could hear his breathing. "What exactly am I being stopped for, officer?" "Benson?" Amara asked, her voice steady despite the tension knotting her shoulders. "I told you. Suspicious behavior," he answered, though he hadn't actually given any reason before. "You were swerving." This was a lie, and they both knew it. Amara had been driving perfectly straight, under the speed limit, following every traffic rule with the precision that came from years of defensive driving training. "I wasn't swerving," she said carefully. "I maintained that I was driving safely and within the speed limit." Benson moved to her side, his flashlight beam scanning the interior of her car through the windows. "You know how many people I pull over who swear they weren't doing anything wrong?" His tone was mocking now. "Everyone's innocent according to them." The wind picked up, sending a chill down Amara's spine. Or maybe it was fear. The kind of deep-seated fear that comes from knowing how quickly situations like this could turn deadly. "I'm going to search your vehicle," Benson announced, not asking permission. "Officer, I do not consent to a search," Amara stated firmly. "You need a warrant or probable cause." Something in her tone, perhaps the confidence, the knowledge of her rights, seemed to anger him further. His grip tightened visibly on his weapon. "You lawyers now too?" he sneered. "People watch one episode of Law and Order and suddenly they're experts." Amara took a deep breath. "I'm not a lawyer," But I am a federal employee, and I know my rights. Unless you can state a legitimate reason for searching my vehicle, I must respectfully decline. Benson stepped closer, using his height to intimidate her. The gun was no longer pointed directly at her, but it remained in his hand, a constant threat. Federal employee, he repeated with obvious disbelief. Let me guess. You work for the post office? The dismissive tone in his voice made it clear. He'd already decided who and what she was based on nothing but her appearance. Amara felt a familiar anger rising within her, but she pushed it down. Emotion would not help her now. I work for the Central Intelligence Agency, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. For a moment there was silence. Then Officer Benson let out a short, harsh laugh that echoed across the empty highway. The CIA, he repeated, making no attempt to hide his disbelief. Right, and I'm the director of the FBI. His laughter continued, as if she'd told the funniest joke he'd heard all night. The disrespect was deliberate, calculated to humiliate. I have identification, Amara said, maintaining her composure. In my jacket pocket. I'm going to reach for it very slowly. Benson's amusement vanished instantly, replaced by suspicion. Keep your hands where they are. Officer, my CIA credentials will verify everything I'm telling you. Lady, do you have any idea how many fake badges I've seen? People buy that stuff online these days. He holstered his weapon finally, but his posture remained aggressive as he pulled out his flashlight and shined it directly in her eyes, momentarily blinding her. So what's the story here? You work for the CIA, but you're driving home at midnight on a back road? Where's your secret agent car? Your fancy gadgets? His tone dripped with sarcasm. Amara blinked against the harsh light. We don't all drive Aston Martins like in the movies, officer. Most of us drive regular cars and live regular lives when we're not at work. Sure, he said, drawing out the word. And what exactly does a CIA? What did you call yourself? Agent? Intelligence. Officer, Amara corrected him. Right, what does an intelligence officer do exactly? Spy on Americans? Assassinate foreign leaders? His questions were deliberately provocative, designed to make her angry, to trip her up. That's not how it works, she replied evenly. And I'm not authorized to discuss the specifics of my job. This seemed to amuse him even more. Of course you can't. Very convenient. A car passed by on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating them before disappearing into the night. Amara followed it with her eyes, wondering if the driver had noticed what was happening, if they'd thought to call for help or if they'd simply driven on, minding their own business. May I show you my credentials now? She asked again. Officer Benson stared at her for a long moment as if trying to decide if she was crazy or just desperate. Finally, he gave a short nod. Very slowly, he warned, his hand returning to rest on his holstered weapon. With careful movements, Amara reached inside her jacket and removed her CIA identification card. The laminated badge caught the light of Benson's flashlight as she held it out to him. He took it from her, studying it with obvious skepticism. The badge was distinctive, different from regular government ID, with security features that were difficult to counterfeit. But Benson seemed determined not to believe it. Pretty good fake, he said, turning it over in his hands. Where'd you get this made? Amara felt her patience wearing thin. It's not fake, Officer Benson. If you call it in, your dispatcher can verify my identity through proper channels. Oh, I'll call it in all right, he said, pocketing her ID rather than returning it. We'll see what the system has to say about your little CIA fantasy. He gestured toward the back of her car. Now, while we wait for that, why don't you tell me what's in your trunk? Nothing of interest, Amara replied. Just a spare tire and some emergency supplies. Open it, he demanded. Again, officer, I do not consent to a search without probable cause. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. In the distance, the rumble of an approaching truck broke the tension momentarily. Benson glanced toward the sound, then back at Amara. You know what? We're going to do this by the book, he said, his voice taking on an official tone that hadn't been there before. Since you want to play hardball, He pulled out his radio, keeping his eyes fixed on her. "Dispatch, this is Unit 437. I need to verify an identification card. Subject claims to be CIA." The radio crackled and a female voice responded. "Go ahead, 437. Benson read off the information from Amara's ID, his tone suggesting he expected the dispatcher to confirm his suspicions that the badge was fake. Amara waited silently, hands still on the hood of her car as instructed. The wind had picked up again, sending leaves skittering across the asphalt. In the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming. The radio crackled with static before the dispatcher's voice returned. "Unit 437, stand by." A minute passed, then another. Officer Benson shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his confidence visibly wavering as the weight extended. Amara remained still, her hands on the hood of her car, rain beginning to spot the pavement around them. Finally, the radio came back to life. "Unit 437, be advised, credentials confirmed." There was a pause, then, with a noticeably different tone. "Officer Benson, you are to immediately return all documentation to the subject. Please switch to Channel 3. The change in the dispatcher's voice was subtle, but unmistakable. A shift from routine to urgent. Benson's face hardened as he clipped the radio back to his belt without acknowledging the order. "Well," he said, his voice tight, "looks like your ID checked out." He held out her credentials but made no apology for his previous behavior. Amara took the badge, tucking it carefully back into her jacket pocket. "Thank you," she said simply. The rain was falling more steadily now, cold drops sliding down her neck. Benson's radio squawked again. "Unit 437, confirm you've switched to Channel 3. His jaw tightened as he reached for the radio. "Just a minute," he told Amara, stepping away toward his patrol car, presumably for some privacy. Although he moved several feet away, Amara could still see him in the side mirror of her car. His back was to her, shoulders tense as he spoke into the radio. Even from this distance, it was clear the conversation wasn't going well for him. His free hand clenched and unclenched at his side. Amara used the moment to discreetly press a button on her wristwatch, a standard-issue CIA communication device disguised as an ordinary timepiece. The watch was connected to a security system in her vehicle that had been recording the entire encounter. With this single press, she'd sent an alert to the agency's security team. It was protocol for high-ranking intelligence officers, especially those working on sensitive domestic threats, as she was. The system was designed to activate automatically during unusual stops or confrontations, but officers could also trigger it manually. She hadn't wanted to escalate the situation earlier, but now that her identity had been confirmed, it was time to follow procedure. Benson returned, his face a rigid mask. The rain had plastered his uniform shirt to his shoulders, but he didn't seem to notice. "You're free to go," he said curtly, as if he were doing her a favor. Amara didn't move. "I'd like your badge number and the name of your supervising officer, please." His eyes narrowed. "That won't be necessary." "I believe it is," she replied calmly. Thunder rumbled closer now, and a flash of lightning briefly illuminated the scene. Amara still with her hands on the hood of her car, Benson standing rigidly before her, the empty highway stretching into darkness behind them. "Look," Benson said, lowering his voice, "we had a misunderstanding. No harm done. Why don't we just leave it at that?" The abrupt change in his demeanor was almost as unsettling as his previous aggression. The threatening officer had vanished, replaced by someone trying to smooth things over. "Officer Benson," Amara said, her voice level, "you pulled a gun on a federal officer without provocation. You refused to believe my identification until forced to verify it. You attempted to conduct an illegal search of my vehicle. And based on several of your comments, I have reason to believe you profiled me based on my race. None of that constitutes a misunderstanding." His face darkened. "That's not what happened, isn't it?" Amara straightened up, no longer assuming. The submissive posture he'd demanded. "My vehicle has recorded this entire encounter." Benson's eyes widened slightly, darting to her car. For the first time, he seemed to notice the small, nearly invisible camera integrated into the rearview mirror mounting. Standard security protocol for intelligence officers, she explained. Audio and video automatically uploaded to a secure server. So when I say I need your badge number and supervisor's information, I'm not making a request. I'm following procedure for reporting a serious incident. The balance of power had shifted completely. Benson's hand moved unconsciously to his holster, not to draw his weapon, but as a nervous gesture. Then, seemingly realizing how this might appear, he quickly moved his hand away. I was just doing my job, he said, defensive now. You reached suddenly. After explicitly telling you I was reaching for my registration, which you had requested, Amara cut in. The footage will show that. Benson's radio crackled again. Unit 437, what's your status? He didn't answer immediately, eyes locked with Amara's. The rain fell harder now, soaking them both. You have no idea what it's like, he finally said, his voice low. Out here alone, pulling over strangers in the middle of the night. You don't know what I've seen. I understand fear, Amara replied. And she did. In her 15 years with the agency, she'd known fear intimately. The cold sweat of undercover work, the constant vigilance, the split-second decisions that could mean life or death. But fear doesn't justify what happened here. Before Benson could respond, headlights appeared on the horizon. A vehicle was approaching fast, its blue and red lights cutting through the rain. Looks like your supervisor got tired of waiting for your response, Amara observed. Benson's face fell as the police SUV pulled up behind his patrol car. The door opened and a heavy-set man in a lieutenant's uniform stepped out, shielding his eyes against the rain. Officer Benson, the lieutenant called out, his voice carrying over the sound of the downpour. Step away from Ms. Jones, please. The use of her name, when Amara hadn't identified herself to the lieutenant, confirmed what she'd suspected. Her security alert had triggered a rapid response. The agency had contacted local police leadership. Benson's shoulders slumped as he turned toward his superior. Lieutenant Walsh, I can explain. I'm sure you can, the lieutenant interrupted, his tone making it clear explanations would wait. Ms. Jones, are you all right? I'm fine, Amara replied, though the adrenaline crash was beginning to hit her, leaving her hands with a slight tremor. Lieutenant Walsh approached, notably keeping his hands visible and his movements slow, the proper way to approach someone, especially at night. On behalf of the department, I want to apologize for any distress this incident has caused. We received a call from... He glanced at Benson, then continued carefully, your employer's security division. Thunder crashed overhead as a second unmarked car pulled up. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their government credentials visible even from a distance. Amara recognized one of them, David Chen from Internal Security. Seems like you've had quite an evening, Chen said as he reached her, handing her a towel from inside his jacket. The simple gesture of kindness, something to dry her rain-soaked face, nearly broke through her professional composure. Just a misunderstanding, she said, echoing Benson's words but with a very different meaning. Chen's eyes flicked to Officer Benson, who was now speaking with Lieutenant Walsh near the patrol car, gesturing animatedly. We've already accessed the footage from your vehicle, Chen told her quietly. Quite illuminating. More vehicles arrived. A third unmarked car, another police cruiser. The deserted highway was suddenly busy with official personnel. Benson stood alone now, watching, as his simple traffic stop evolved into something much bigger, his face pale in the flashing lights. By 2 a.m., what had begun as a routine traffic stop had transformed into something that looked more like a crime scene investigation. Portable lights now illuminated the highway shoulder, their harsh glow pushing back against the rainy darkness. Amara sat in the back of Chen's government sedan, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. Through the windshield, she could see Officer Benson standing beside Lieutenant Walsh, both men watching as a technician downloaded footage from Amara's car. You doing okay? Chen asked, sliding into the driver's seat. Water dripped from his suit jacket onto the leather interior. Amara nodded. The adrenaline crash had hit her hard once the immediate danger had passed. Now she just felt tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came after sustained fear. "They've asked if you'd be willing to give a statement tonight," Chen continued, his tone making it clear this was entirely her choice, "but it can wait until morning if you prefer." Amara took a sip of coffee, considering. On one hand, she wanted nothing more than to go home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. On the other, she knew how these things worked. Evidence needed. To be fresh, statements taken while memories were clear. "I'll do it now," she decided. Chen nodded, unsurprised. In the 5 years they'd worked together, he'd come to know her professional dedication. They've set up a temporary interview room at the station. Nothing fancy. Through the rain-streaked window, Amara watched as Lieutenant Walsh suddenly stepped closer to Benson, his body language shifting from professional to confrontational. Though she couldn't hear their conversation, it was clear the lieutenant had just seen something on the technician's laptop, something from her car's footage, that had angered him. Benson's defensive posture collapsed as Walsh pointed a finger at his chest, speaking words that made the younger officer's face drain of color. Then came a gesture Amara hadn't expected, Walsh extending his hand, palm up. "He's asking for his badge and gun," Chen observed quietly. Sure enough, with visible reluctance, Benson unclipped his badge from his uniform and placed it in the lieutenant's outstretched hand. His service weapon followed, removed from its holster, with slumped shoulders. "That's unusual, isn't it?" Amara asked. "To happen so quickly, I mean." Chen turned to her. "The agency sent over some preliminary footage while I was driving here. Just the worst parts. You announcing you were reaching for your registration, him drawing his weapon anyway, the comments about you not looking like someone who works for the government, combined with your status. Let's just say they're taking this very seriously." Outside, another officer approached Benson, speaking to him briefly before directing him toward a patrol car, not the one Benson had arrived in. The officer opened the rear door, and after a moment's hesitation, Benson got inside. "Are they arresting him?" Amara asked, surprised despite everything that had happened. "Not exactly," Chen replied. "More like detaining him pending investigation. But if the rest of the footage is consistent with what they've already seen, formal charges will likely follow." Lieutenant Walsh approached their car now, knocking lightly on the window before Chen lowered it. "Ms. Jones, I cannot express how deeply sorry the department is for what happened tonight," Walsh said, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "I've reviewed enough of the footage to see that Officer Benson's actions were completely unacceptable." "Thank you," Amara said simply. "We'd like to get your official statement if you're willing. After that, we can arrange an escort to take you home." Amara nodded, gathering her jacket around her as she prepared to step back out into the rain. "There's something else you should know," Walsh added, his expression grave. "This isn't the first complaint against Officer Benson." Chen shifted in his seat. "Past incidents of racial profiling?" "3 formal complaints in the last year alone," Walsh confirmed. "But nothing stuck. 2 complaints were withdrawn. I'm now wondering if the complainants were pressured, and 1 was dismissed for lack of evidence." "No body camera?" Amara asked. Walsh's expression darkened further. "Conveniently malfunctioning during those incidents, which makes your vehicle's footage all the more important." The rain had slowed to a drizzle as they made the short drive to the police station. The building was mostly quiet at this late hour. Just a few officers on night duty who watched with curious expressions as Lieutenant Walsh led Amara and Chen to a small conference room. Inside, a woman in a smart pantsuit waited, introducing herself as Diane Rivera from Internal Affairs. Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Ms. Jones, we don't typically see cases with this level of documentation," Rivera said, gesturing to the laptop open on the table. "The footage from your vehicle is troubling, to say the least." Amara took a seat, accepting the offer of another coffee. "I understand Officer Benson has been detained?" Rivera nodded. "For now, he's being held for questioning. Whether formal charges are filed will depend on several factors, including your statement and how the investigation unfolds." For the next hour, Amara recounted the events of the night in meticulous detail, Every word Benson had said, every action he'd taken, every moment she'd felt her life was in danger. Rivera recorded it all, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions. When Amara finished, Rivera closed her notebook. "Given your position, I have to ask, do you intend to pursue federal charges?" It was a question Amara had been considering since the moment Benson had drawn his weapon. As a private citizen, she would have every right to push for civil rights violation charges. As a CIA officer, the situation was more complicated. Drawing attention to herself through a court case could potentially compromise operational security. "I haven't decided," she answered honestly. "For now, I'm more concerned that this doesn't happen to someone else, someone who doesn't have recording equipment in their car and a security team to call." Rivera's expression softened slightly. "Between the footage and your statement, there's more than enough to justify termination and potential criminal charges at the local level. But you should know—" She leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly. "Officer Benson isn't acting alone. We've had concerns about a small group within the department for some time. Tonight might give us leverage to expand our investigation." This caught Amara's attention. In her work at the agency, she'd been tracking domestic extremism networks, including infiltration of law enforcement. If Benson was part of something larger, "I'd be interested in hearing more about that," she said. Carefully, Rivera and Walsh exchanged looks. "We should continue this conversation tomorrow," Rivera suggested, "when you've had some rest." As they prepared to leave, Walsh's radio crackled. He stepped outside to take the call, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "There's a situation at Holding," he said to Rivera. "Officer Benson is demanding to speak with Ms. Jones." "Absolutely not," Chen said immediately. "I agree," Walsh added. "I just thought you should be aware." Amara considered for a moment. "What's he saying exactly?" Walsh shook his head. "Claims he has information relevant to your work. Says it's the reason he stopped you in the first place." The room fell silent as the implications of this statement hung in the air. Could Benson have recognized her? Known about her work? Or was this just a desperate attempt to create leverage? "It could be a ploy," Rivera suggested, trying to establish that he had legitimate reasons for the stop. "Maybe," Amara agreed. But her instincts, honed through years of intelligence work, were suddenly alert. "But I think I should hear what he has to say." The holding cell was bare and cold, with nothing but a metal bench and the sharp smell of disinfectant. Officer Benson sat with his head down, uniform wrinkled, the empty space on his belt where his gun and badge had been a constant reminder of how quickly his life had changed. He looked up when the door opened, expecting another stern-faced internal affairs officer. Instead, Amara Jones walked in. Her presence seemed to fill the small room. Though she'd changed into dry clothes, a simple gray sweater and dark pants, provided by someone at the station, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. Behind her stood Chen and Rivera, watchful and tense. "You wanted to talk," Amara said without preamble. "So talk." Benson straightened, eyes darting between her and the others. "I thought this would be private." "That's not happening," Chen replied flatly. "Whatever you have to say to Ms. Jones, you can say with us present." A flash of anger crossed Benson's face, quickly replaced by resignation. The fight had drained out of him, leaving behind a man who suddenly looked much older than his years. "I recognized your name," he said finally, voice low. "When I ran your license, Jones, Amara, I've seen it before." Amara kept her expression neutral, though her mind was racing. Her current assignment involved monitoring domestic extremist networks, groups with increasingly concerning connections to local law enforcement across several states. If Benson had seen her name, "Where exactly did you see my name?" she asked. Benson glanced at Rivera, hesitating. "I'm part of a group, law enforcement officers who believe the government's been compromised. They share information, names to watch for. Your name was on a list that circulated about 6 months ago." Rivera stepped forward. "What kind of group are we talking about, Officer Benson?" "They call themselves the Guardians," he answered reluctantly. "Started as just a forum for cops to vent about politics, but it's gotten more extreme. They've been identifying government employees they believe are part of some deep state conspiracy. Amara exchanged looks with Chen. This aligned perfectly with her team's intelligence on rising extremism within law enforcement, a troubling trend they'd been tracking for nearly 2 years. "So you stopped me because my name was on some list?" she asked, pieces falling into place. "Not because I was swerving or any other traffic violation?" Benson nodded slowly. "When your name and vehicle description came up in my patrol zone, I was supposed to find a reason to stop you. Search your car if possible, document everything. Report back to this group?" "Yes." The simplicity of his confession was almost shocking. Amara studied him. This man who had pointed a gun at her had just hours ago now looked defeated, almost pathetic. "How many officers in your department are involved with the Guardians?" Rivera asked, her voice sharp with professional concern. Benson shrugged. "5 that I know of, maybe more." Rivera made a note. "And other departments?" "It's all over. Dozens of jurisdictions, hundreds of officers, maybe thousands nationwide. They're careful, use encrypted messaging, rotating channels." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What had begun as a frightening traffic stop for Amara was revealing itself to be part of something far more dangerous, a coordinated effort to target government officials perceived as enemies. "Why are you telling us this now?" Chen asked, skepticism clear in his voice. Benson looked up, his eyes meeting Amara's directly for the first time. "Because when the dispatcher confirmed you were actually CIA, I realized I'd been fed lies. The list claimed you were part of a foreign-funded operation to undermine American law enforcement. But you're just doing your job, aren't you?" The question hung in the air. Amara didn't answer, couldn't answer, about the specifics of her work. But she could see the dawning comprehension in Benson's eyes as he began to understand how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. "I've made a terrible mistake," he said quietly. "Several," Amara corrected him. "Drawing your weapon without cause, attempting an illegal search, racial profiling, threatening a federal officer." "Yes." No excuses this time, no attempts to justify his actions. "We'll need names," Rivera said. "Every officer you know who's connected to this group. Server information, meeting locations, everything." Benson nodded slowly. "If I cooperate, what happens to me?" No one offered him false comfort or easy promises. The seriousness of his actions and the potential charges remained unchanged by his willingness to talk now. "That will be for the prosecutors to decide," Rivera finally said, "but full cooperation will be noted." Dawn was breaking as Amara finally left the station, pink light washing over the rain-slicked streets. She hadn't slept in over 24 hours, but adrenaline and professional focus kept her mind sharp. In the car, Chen was already on the phone, communicating in the careful, coded language of intelligence professionals. "Assets secured. Yes, significant development. Wider than projected. Immediate escalation recommended." Amara watched the town passing by outside the window. Regular people were starting their day. A woman walking her dog, a man opening a coffee shop, kids waiting for a school bus. None of them aware of what had been uncovered overnight, how a routine traffic stop had cracked open something much darker. 6 months later, Amara sat in a conference room at CIA headquarters reviewing the latest report. Operation Guardian Response, as the joint agency effort had been codenamed, had resulted in the identification of over 300 law enforcement officers with connections to extremist networks. 42 had been arrested on various charges. Dozens more suspended or under investigation. The ripple effects were still spreading. "The Attorney General wants to meet with you," her supervisor said, dropping a folder on the desk. "Your experience has become something of a catalyst. They're developing new training protocols for police departments nationwide." Amara nodded, thinking back to that rainy night on the highway. In the months since, she'd given statements to Internal Affairs, the FBI, and a closed congressional committee. Officer Benson had pled guilty to multiple charges and was awaiting sentencing, facing years in prison despite his eventual cooperation. "There's something else," her supervisor continued. They're forming a special task force, joint operation between the Bureau and local law enforcement, focused on identifying and addressing extremism within police ranks. They're asking if you'd consider serving as a liaison. The request surprised her. Amara had spent her career in intelligence, largely working in the shadows. A public-facing role with a high-profile task force was a significant departure. "Why me specifically?" she asked. "Because you've lived it," her supervisor answered simply. "And because what happened to you that night could have gone very differently." Amara knew this was true. Had she not been a CIA officer with recording equipment and a security team, had she been simply an ordinary black woman facing an officer with extremist views and a drawn weapon, the outcome might have been tragic. "I'll consider it," she said. Later that evening, Amara stood at the window of her apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of orange and gold. On her coffee table lay a formal offer letter for the task force position. Taking it would mean stepping into public view, becoming a visible advocate for reform rather than working behind the scenes. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Another incident, another traffic stop gone wrong in a different state, the cycle continuing. Amara picked up the offer letter again, her decision made.